Hello, dear students. I am Dr. Ahmed Samir, and this lecture we are going to discuss the last part of the bone tissue, which is the osteogenesis. And what we mean by osteogenesis is osteo means bone tissue, and the genesis means formation of a new. So in this lecture, we are going to discuss how the bone tissue is formed. Okay, so by the end of this lecture, you will be able to define the types of bone development, describe the types of bone growth, define medical problems resulting from defective bone structure. So osteogenesis or the development of new bone is a process called an ossification. Okay, so what we mean by ossification is the process of new bone formation. So the osteogenesis or the development of bone from the embryonic in the embryo actually the new bone is formed by one of two ways. Okay, either the intramembranous ossification, where the a membranous connective tissue is formed at first to be transformed into bone tissue, and that's called intramembranous ossification. And the other way is the endochondral ossification or intracartilaginous ossification, where a cartilage model is formed at first to be transformed later on into bone tissue. Okay, so these are the two ways where new bone is formed in the embryo. The intramembranous ossification actually is present in flat bones like the skull, as we mentioned before, and short bones like the vertebra. Okay, so and ribs. So in these types of bones, flat and short bones, the type of ossification is intramembranous ossification, which means that initially these structures are formed by a mesenchymal connective tissue. Okay, mesenchymal connective tissue. So an ossification center starts to appear in this connective tissue to transform the whole structure into new bone to be formed and replace the mesenchymal connective tissue. So that's the intramembranous ossification. The other way which is the endochondral ossification, which we mentioned before. It starts as a cartilage model to be replaced by an ossification center appearing in the cartilage model to start formation of a new bone and replace the whole cartilage model. Okay, so this is the endochondral ossification or intracartilaginous ossification, and it actually is evident in long bones like bones of humerus, femur. In these bones, the type of ossification is endochondral ossification. Okay, so let's go now for to discuss bone growth. The growth of bone, we will take an example here, like a long bone. It starts in two directions, either which growth in width, bone enlarges in diameter and grow in width, and this is called appositional growth. Okay, or the bone it starts to grow in length, and this is termed interstitial growth. The appositional growth, which the growth in diameter or width, actually we mentioned the process in the previous lectures. It starts by addition of new bone lamellae from the periosteum in the osteogenic cells lying in the periosteum layer covering the bone. These cells start to secrete new bone lamellae and thus forming a new layers or new lamellae of calcified bone tissue, and subsequently the bone grow in width. Okay, but what we are going now to discuss is how the bone grow in length. So between the shaft of the long bone and the end or epiphysis of the bone, there is a cartilaginous plate present separating both ends. This is called a cartilage growth plate or epiphyseal plate. And in this plate, the cartilage tissue, which is present here, is actually responsible for the growth of the bone in length, which is interstitial growth, as we are going to discuss the process in the next few slides. Okay, so in the epiphyseal plate, if we take a section in this part only and zoom into this window, we're going to see this diagram in the right side. Okay, so the first zone, which is called zone of resting cartilage, we can see that there are chondrocytes entrapped inside its lacuna and separated by the cartilage matrix, hyaline cartilage matrix. So this structure is similar to the resting hyaline cartilage. That's why it's called a zone of resting cartilage. Now in the next zone, which is zone of proliferation, in what happens in this zone, that the cells or the chondrocytes started to divide and increase in number and to be arranged in rows parallel or beneath each other, and with a little intercellular or a little hyaline matrix in between these cells. Okay, actually you can see here in this part that the number of the chondrocytes per the matrix around them increased in ratio. Okay, so that's why it's called the zone of proliferation. And in the next zone, which is zone of hypertrophy, we can see that the hyaline cartilage cells or the chondrocytes started to enlarge in diameter, in size, okay, and accumulate more lipid and glycogen and alkaline phosphatase, thus resulting in the increased size of the chondrocytes. That's why it's called zone of hypertrophy. Why the chondrocytes start to increase in size? Actually, the matrix in between them becomes more thinner. Okay, so in the zone of calcification, with a little matrix in between these cells and the release of alkaline phosphatase accumulated in the previous zone, results in calcification of the surrounding cartilage matrix, resulting finally in the zone of calcification, where a calcified matrix is a little calcified matrix is present between the hypertrophied cartilage cells, and the calcification of the matrix results in impermeable matrix to the diffusion of nutrients. So the chondrocytes entrapped inside lacunae started to die, actually, leaving a hollow lacunae, and these lacunae actually started to fuse with each other, forming a hollow canal, which is caused by the death of the chondrocytes due to the calcified matrix, and thus the diffusion of nutrients stopped to the growing or hypertrophied chondrocytes. Okay, so in the last zone, which is zone of ossification, and from its name, to be transformed, the cartilage model to be transformed into a new bone, where the blood capillaries present below the epiphyseal plate start to carry osteogenic cells, which are the osteogenic cells, osteoblast and osteoclast, thus laying down the primitive layer of endosteum. So, and this layer of endosteum start to produce new bone at the places where the dead or hollow lacunae, okay, in which the dead chondrocytes were present before leaving this empty space. So now the new bone become formed in these empty spaces, and now by the process of the remodeling of by the endosteum, as we mentioned before in the previous lectures, started to reshape and remodel this primitive bone tissue into mature bone tissue. Okay, and we mentioned before that the process of remodeling actually is a character of the endosteum, endosteal cells. Okay, because the endosteum has three types of cells, which are osteogenic cells, osteoblasts, and osteoclasts. And we also mentioned before that the osteoclasts started to resorb the broken or old or worn out bone tissue to become replaced by newly synthesized calcified bone matrix secreted by the osteoblasts and osteogenic cells. Okay, that's the normal process of remodeling. So now these are, to recap, the zones: zone of resting cartilage, zone of proliferation, zone of hypertrophy, zone of calcification, then zone of ossification. Okay, and now the normal or healthy bone mass is caused by, as we mentioned before, the normal process of remodeling, which is caused by a balance between a bone resorption and bone formation. So what we can think about now is if this balance is subject to any factor that resulted in an imbalance of this mutual dynamic process, which is bone resorption and bone formation. Actually, any factors that can disrupt this balance can result into clinically produced signs and symptoms or diseases that we are going to mention little points at some of the common diseases found related to the imbalance between bone formation and bone resorption. So the osteoblasts, which are responsible actually for the bone formation, can be subject to hormonal imbalance, especially by the growth hormone, where before puberty, actually, if there is an increase in the growth hormone, it can result into gigantism, while after puberty, if there is an increase in the growth hormone, it results in acromegaly. However, if there is a defective calcification caused by osteoblast, it can result either into rickets or osteomalacia. So a defective calcification can result into rickets, one of the commonest diseases of children, due to defective calcification before puberty, or osteomalacia, which results in a defective calcification after puberty. Okay. So these are the conditions related to osteoblast, either hormonal imbalance or the bone tissue itself or matrix is disrupted, or the defective calcification resulting into either rickets or osteomalacia. And we have mentioned in the previous lecture that osteoclast may be also subject to some degree of medical symptoms or signs or diseases, actually, where in some cases it can there is an increased resorption of osteoclast of bone by the osteoclast cells, resulting in weak bone calcification or defective bone tissue, actually matrix. This is osteoporosis, and we mentioned before that in the patients subject to be immobilized for a while of time, like patients suffering from severe fractures can be immobilized for a while of time, and in these patients there is an increased activity of osteoclast, resulting in increased resorption of bone. Thus, the bone matrix is weakened, resulting in easily fractured bone, even from minor injuries or trauma. Okay, and this is in osteoporosis, and it is also more evident in postmenopausal women. Okay, and there is also another example where there was an gene mutation affecting the ruffled border of the osteoclast. Thus, the cells cannot resorb the bone, resulting in osteopetrosis. Okay, where the bone is not resorbed correctly, and there is an increase in the mass or diameter or the density of the bone tissue, resulting in the medullary cavities or the bone marrow tissue to be affected, resulting in anemia and decreased white blood cell count. And this is an example of gigantism, okay, due to increased growth hormone before puberty. And this is an example of acromegaly, resulting to increased growth hormone after puberty, affecting both previous diseases affecting osteoblast, and also an osteoblast can cause a defective calcification, either in rickets in children or osteomalacia, evident here by a bowing of the legs in the adults. Okay, so that's the lecture for now. I hope it was helpful for you. So thank you and good luck.